I almost don't need my message. That was well, welcome. It is good to be with you here today. We are in week 4 of a series we are calling Apps. And today, to get us started, the app we're talking about today is rest. Top 10 signs that maybe you need more rest. Now, usually you know if you need more rest, right? But just in case you didn't, top 10 signs you need more rest. Number 10, you talked yourself into believing that Red Bull actually tastes good. That's a sign that maybe you need more rest. Number 9, you've mastered the art of resting one eye at a time. Number 8, you mastered the art of resting one eye at a time while driving. Number 7, you consider putting in your will that on your tombstone it will say, asleep at last, do not disturb. Number 6, the last time you completed a thought was... Oh, never mind, I forgot what I was going to say. Number 5, your sleep number is set at never. Number 4, every time you walk into Starbucks, everyone shouts out your name. Number 3, when you walk into Starbucks, the barista asks, what will you have this hour, Mr. Davidson? Number 2, every time you pass a red stop along the highway, you bitterly shake your fist at the sleeping truckers as you lay on your horn. And the number 1 sign that maybe you need more rest at church, when the pastor starts talking, you think, oh, sweet, nap time. So well, welcome. We are talking about rest today. The last couple of weeks, what we've been doing is looking at what we call apps or applications. And at the beginning, what we said was that application is everything. There's a lot of principles in the Bible that we can learn about, hear, and even think this is a really good idea, but until we actually apply them, nothing is accomplished. Sometimes we think hearing about them is all we need to do, or hearing about them, and sometimes feeling guilty about them, that we had some kind of religious experience. But the reality is, application is everything. The only deep change happens is when we apply it. I think of it like buying a treadmill, stick it in your garage. You've accomplished nothing until you run on it. You can buy multivitamins, stick it in your cabinet. No progress has been made until you actually take the multivitamins. So in the same way, we've been looking at applications the Bible gives us, and we might know about them. The first 1 week we talked about forgiveness, and we saw that a lot of people think forgiveness is a good idea and it ought to be done, but until we actually do it, nothing's been accomplished. Last week we talked about confession. This week we're talking about rest. And this is one I will honestly say I have never done a whole message on rest. But as I look around the world we live in, this is, for me, I think, a really important one. Just a real quick survey. In the last, let's say, 7 days, if you've had the feeling of being overwhelmed or exhausted, just throw your hand up real quick, all right? Now look around the people that don't have their hands up. They're too tired to put their hands up, right? We are literally a generation of the exhausted. And the problem is we actually see this most inside the church. And because what happened to me when I first became a Christ follower, I think happens to a lot of people. I became a Christ follower when I was in college. And in college, there aren't that many responsibilities. You go to school, you do your homework, that's pretty much it, right? So there's lots of free time. And so I would hear things that are good to do, and they're all good things to do, and I would start doing them. Like it's a good thing to go to church and be involved with a small group. And then it's a good thing to read your Bible on a daily basis. It's a good thing to pray every day. It's a good thing to find a place in the church and serve. And there's a lot of hurting people outside the church, so it's good to go to them and serve them. And if you hear a friend who's hurting or a friend going through trouble, you got to give them. And all these good things started piling up, and I got busier and busier, and I noticed I got more tired and cranky, a little bit bitter, and I tended to snap at people. And there was a reality that came with it, and that was this. The truth is, I'm not at my best when I'm worn out. Right? That was a reality I saw of myself. I snapped at my friends. I was overly critical. There was a chance that I would slip into a religious attitude. Instead of having a love for Jesus, I would slip into a religious attitude. I tended to rely on myself more than I would rely on God. And I bet you're the same way as me. And the reality is even if we can hold it together, a lot of times we trick ourselves into thinking, I'm tired, I can't sustain this pace, but I can hold it together. Like holding it together is the greatest goal that God has for our life. If I can just not go mental this week, right, that God would consider that an accomplishment. But the reality is, even if we're holding it together, doesn't mean we're experiencing joy or we're loving other people the way we ought to love them. My thought on this is that God has more for us, right? His highest agenda for us is not to be exhausted and worn out. The bottom line is this. The best thing I have to offer anyone in my life, anyone I will ever meet, is a rested, replenished, and passionate me. That's the best thing I have to offer. And then when you open the scripture, the good news is that despite the church overworking us sometimes, the reality is the Bible teaches a concept, an application called rest. Let me show you a couple places in this. First place to see it is in Genesis chapter 2, all the way back at the beginning. God spends 6 days, he creates everything. In 6 days, God creates everything. And on Genesis 2:2, it says, on the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy because it was the day he rested from all his work of creation. Now we look at this and we think it reveals something about God, that God himself rested. Now understand something. What we know about God is he doesn't get tired, right? He doesn't get overextended. He's all-powerful and all-knowing, so he doesn't have like one of those mental freezes either, right? But he chooses to rest. Now, the question is, why in the world would he choose to rest? A lot of times the popular answer is because he's modeling for us, right? And it goes on to say the nation of Israel would later celebrate the seventh day as a day of rest or a Sabbath, right? So they would work 6 days, and in honor of God's creation, they would rest on that seventh day as a way, and it was a way to celebrate God's biggest accomplishment at that time, which was creation. He created everything. It was a day of rest and remembrance of what God did. Now, just a little quick history note. Sometime later, a group of Jewish people changed their worship day from the seventh day to the first day. We see this in Acts 20, verse 7. It says, on the first day of the week, we gathered with the local believers to share the Lord's Supper. So they changed, and this was a big deal because the Sabbath, the day of rest, was a big deal, but they moved it from the seventh day to the first day. You know why they did that? Jesus rose on the first day. And so suddenly they're celebrating an accomplishment, something God did that was even more important than the creation. Jesus rose from the dead. And so since then we meet on the first day. But the point is this, is that God wasn't exhausted. When we think of rest, if you work 6 days straight without stop, without taking a lunch break, you're going to come home, you're going to put your feet up, you're going to drink Mountain Dew, watch Duck Dynasty, and you're going to chill out, right? Not because you finally have time out, is you can't go any further. You're exhausted. God wasn't exhausted. He chooses to rest anyways. There's a value in rest that's really important. In Matthew chapter 11, this is a popular verse that we often quote. If you're in Sunday school and you're going to memorize 3 verses, you go to John 3:16, John 14:6, and then you hit up Matthew 11:28, and it says this, then Jesus said, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens. And I can picture the setting there, right? Jesus is talking to a lot of people, and we think they're way different than us, but they're not, right? He says, is anyone exhausted or tired or overworked or just weary from life? And everyone in the audience would have been like, yo, Jesus, dude, that's me. You're talking to me right here, right? And it's the same today when Jesus says, is anybody weary or carrying heavy burdens, right? And the reality is, that's us, right? That's us living in this world. And he says, come to me. Now notice he doesn't say come to church or come to religious activity, right? He doesn't say that. He says come to Jesus and he's going to give you rest. And I know that we misread this verse sometimes because we often think, well, he's talking like spiritually resting, right? Because I can be physically exhausted but I'm resting on the inside, right? Or, I'm resting. The reality is we got to know ourselves better than that, right? When we're physically exhausted, worn out, overextended, we're not the same on the inside, right? We don't think the same. We don't feel the same. You're more likely not to love the people that are closest to you the way you would if you are fully rested and recovered. The reality is we're not the same. There's this invitation from Jesus to come to him and find rest. Now, isn't that appealing? Jesus says, come to him and find rest. In Matthew chapter 14. And by the way, Jesus did something that we overlook a lot of times when we read through the gospel. Do you know that? When we think of what Jesus did, a lot of times we think of all the miracles and the teachings and things like that. But in between all that, often Jesus himself would pull back, right? He would pull back and go, sometimes just with his disciples, his closest friends. Sometimes he would even pull back from them as well. This is just one example in Matthew 14. This is after a couple weeks ago we looked at the feeding of the 5,000. So Jesus is ministering to not 5,000 people. Those are 5,000 men representing family units. It was probably like 20,000 people there that he's ministering to, right? And they feed him, and by the end of the day, guess what? He's worn out. He's tired. And it says in verse 22, immediately Jesus made his disciples get in the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. Jesus pulls back from everyone for the purpose of recovering. He engages, he ministers, he's with people all the time, but at times Jesus himself has to pull back and get rest. Now my point is this, if Jesus had to do it, who the heck do we think we are that we can skip over that, right? If Jesus needed to pull back to recover and to re-engage properly, at times we're all going to have to pull back, get rest. And this is what I'm saying. It's the most, if we're Christ followers, this is the most spiritual thing sometimes you can do. If you want, you can call this the nap app if you want, right? Because at times, the best thing we can do as stewards of all the things that God has given us, the most important thing we can do is get enough rest to pull back. Sometimes to say no to good things that are being asked of us, right? At times, the most spiritual thing you can do is say no to something for the purpose of recovering. Now, back in the Old Testament, there was a guy by the name of Elijah, and Elijah was one of my favorite Old Testament characters because he did some cool stuff. At one point, Elijah was a prophet of God, and he was living during the time of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, and they were not good leaders. Matter of fact, what they did in the nation of Israel is they basically turned Israel, the whole nation, from worshiping God to worshiping a false god by the name of Baal. And they had a whole bunch of false prophets, and they would go throughout the whole country, and they would turn people who were worshiping God, they would turn them to worshiping Baal and setting up false idols. And Elijah confronts them. In one of the best scenes, I think, in the Bible, Elijah confronts 450 of the prophets with a challenge. He says, here's what we're going to do. You're going to pray to your God, and I'm going to pray to my God. We're going to set up two altars. And the God that is in charge, the strongest, the all-powerful one, is going to send fire down from the sky and consume our altar. And Elijah even lets the 450 prophets of Baal go first. And they're thinking, all right, there's 450 of us, and there's one of him. We got this, right? In any other setting, like if it's a football game, 450 versus one, that's not fair, right? They think, so they start praying, and nothing happens. They pray harder, and nothing happens. And one of the funniest parts of the Bible is Elijah starts trash talking, right? He says, maybe your God's asleep or on vacation. You know, maybe he's playing Xbox. Who knows? Maybe you should pray harder. So they hear Elijah, they pray even harder, and Elijah says, all right, it's my turn. And he pours water onto his altar, right? He pours a bunch of water on it, and then he starts praying. Guess what happens? Fire comes down from heaven. And all the people, the nation of Israel, they're watching this. And then when they see this, they realize, we've been deceived. We've been tricked. right? We're worshiping the rock, and they start worshiping God again. And because of that, they realize that the 450 prophets of Baal have been deceiving them on purpose, so they actually rise up and kill the 450 prophets. And then King Ahab goes back and tells Queen Jezebel, right? Elijah has this major victory. Like, he saw God turn the nation of Israel around. Ahab goes home, tells Jezebel, and in 1 Kings 19:1, it says, when Ahab got home, he told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he had killed all the prophets of Baal. So Jezebel sent this message to Elijah, may the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them. Now when you read that and know what just happened, you think Elijah's not going to be scared of this lady, right? He just took down 450 prophets of Baal. He's not going to be scared of everything. In my mind, I picture like Gladiator meets Braveheart meets 300 meets, Jedi Knights rolled into one guy, and that's Elijah right there. He's not going to back down from Queen Jezebel. The problem is this. He's worn out. I mean, he's worn thin, right? He's a prophet of God, but he's human, and he's just spread thin. Verse 3, Elijah was afraid and fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. Then he went on along into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down on a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. And he says this, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. He says, God, take my life. I've had enough. I am completely done. Have you ever been to that place? Right? Have you ever been to a place where you think, that's all I've got? I'm done. I can't go any further. He's thinking it would be better if I wasn't alive than to be living so worn out in this place. Right? We've all been there. If you're there right now and you're looking around and you think, I'm the only one there, just understand we know how to act well, okay? You're not the only one who's been there. We've all been there. And the reality is, God understands your position better than you think. Because what God does next, I think, is really important. God doesn't send a preacher with a 4-hour sermon to talk to him, right? He doesn't give him a lecture. Doesn't say, just put on your big boy pants and get back to work there, buddy, right? He does this in verse 5. It says, then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. But as he was sleeping, an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. He looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on the stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. Then the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead of you will be too much for you. So he got up, ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. Right? Understand this, is that God knew what Elijah needed. He didn't need another lecture. He didn't need another sermon. He needed rest. Right? He sends the angel from the Food Network, shows up with a picnic for him. But the reality is he knew where Elijah was. Now after this, we're not going to read this part, but after this, he does give him a lesson. He does give him like a message and reveals his nature to him. But he knows that if Elijah's worn out, even the best message wouldn't take. Right? He knew that in order for him to receive what God wanted to show him, he had to be rested, replenished, and passionate about life again. And the reality is this, rest reality, the best thing I have to offer and you put anyone in there you want. It might be your spouse, it might be your kids, it might be your coworkers, it might be your church, it might be the people who live next door to you, whoever it is. The best thing I have to offer anyone is a rested, replenished, and passionate me. That is your best gift you can give anyone. And that's true of your spouse, that's true of your coworkers, that's true of your church, the people in your growth group. It's true. And here's the thing, the medical community agrees with us, right? The medical community says you need 8.5 hours of sleep every day to be healthy. The average American gets 6.9, right? And some of you are hearing that and saying, yeah, 6.9, I haven't done that in years. I'm like 4.3, right? Here's the thing. What does that do to you over time, right? Because we think, well, I can miss 1 hour today. If you miss an hour every day for 8 days, you miss a whole night's sleep that you should have. What does that do to your health? What does that do to your relationships? What does that do to when you go under trials and stress? How does it affect how you respond to it, right? It's true with our kids as well. There was one survey, a Gallup survey of kids from 3rd grade to 12th grade, and they were asked one question: if you can give one thing to if you had one wish for your parents, what would it be? And it wasn't that they would have more money or that they would give me more stuff. And it wasn't even, I wish they would spend more time with me. It was, I wish for my parents that they would be less stressed out and have more rest. Right? So our kids get it. Right? The reality is the best thing we have to give any of our kids is a rested, replenished, and mom or dad who is passionate about life. Now what are we going to do about it? So this is all nice, but we live in the real world and understand there is going to be times when that's not possible. A couple nights ago, we were sleeping and resting, and our fire alarm went off. And it was one of those where like the whole house shakes, like to wake you up, right? And you know what was on fire? Nothing. It just went off, right? So life happens. But the reality is, if we don't plan for rest, it's never, ever going to happen. If we don't take it serious, we're never going to be rested and replenished, and we will never be passionate about what God is up to if we are completely exhausted. Let me give you some tips. And you can fill in the blanks for this where you're at. Number 1, pull back on purpose and regularly. And you're going to have to fight for this, right? Because there's all kinds of things that are going to compete for your time. I guarantee it, right? And they're going to be good things. Trust me, there's enough good things to wear you out for the rest of your life, right? We're going to have to fight on purpose for enough rest and to do it regularly. Number 2, you need to be realistic on how you guard your rest. Now, the other day I realized this when I was with my daughter, and the mailman pulled up and started putting mail at our box. And she gets all excited when the mail person gets there, because if she gets something in the mail, it's something really good, right? It's a birthday invitation, it's a thank you card, or it's a gift or something like that. If she gets something, it's not often, but if she gets something, it's good. When the mailman shows up, I go, oh, more bills. Right? You know what I'm saying? Nothing ever good comes in the mail, right? And the same is true for some of you that look at your email or your text or your Facebook right before you go to bed. You know something bad could be in there, right? That you can read it and look at it, and you're not going to be able to sleep because of what you just read. Now, I'm going to give you a truth. You don't have to write this down. This is an amazing truth. Your emails will be there in the morning. They are literally not going anywhere. Facebook, all your friends that update their status on what they just ate, it's going to be there, and it's going to be digested in the morning, right? So you don't have to worry about it. It'll still be there. But here's my point, is be realistic on how you guard your rest, right? If you drink coffee at 6 at night and it keeps you up, stop drinking the coffee at 6 at night, right? It's this kind of thing. We have to be realistic about ourselves. And number 3, and this is where you really got to fill in the blank. Find out what makes your heart come alive and repeat it. And I have no idea what that is for you. It's going to be different for each person. But part of what rest is, it doesn't mean just going in a closet and closing the door. It's reviving the heart, right? God wants to keep your heart fully alive. That is the point of the rest. If you know something, you can, like if you go fishing and that makes your heart come alive, go fishing, right? If you know reading a book out in your backyard makes your heart come alive, read a stinking book in your backyard. Do you see what I'm saying? If God puts something in you that makes your heart come alive, repeat it. And if you know your spouse has something that makes their heart come alive, you let them do it. It's good for you, right? You know, if they are fully alive, if they're fully passionate about life and rested and replenished, give them the time to go do that, right? So bottom line is this. God gave us a rest application. We can hear it and say, that's a good idea. I need more rest. I'd be better if I rest. Nothing happens until we go do it. For some of us, our application today is going to be to take a nap today, right? This is that you can tell your boss, I mean, if you have to work, you have to go to work. But if you need to take a nap, right, take a nap for Jesus, right? In honor of Jesus, get enough rest, because the best gift we can give anyone is a rested and replenished us. Let's pray together.